All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott from Jeff Teaches Programming, and after a little bit of thought, I decided I will do one more lecture tonight, which will be an introduction to Entity Framework, and in particular, what's called Entity Framework Core, or EF Core. All right, now, I found this online from C# Corner. We'll go over that in a little bit. I found this step-by-step guide on medium.com. We can go over that, but I want to just kind of give you my own take on this before we get started. I put down a few notes. Now, I've seen the definition of Entity Framework Core, EF Core, as being a lightweight, open source object relational mapper, or ORM, developed by Microsoft specifically for .NET. Now, what the heck does that mean? It means it allows you to work with databases using C# objects, and we've been working with objects, but you can use objects rather than using raw SQL queries as we did before. All right. So for lack of better words, it helps to bridge the gap between C# classes and databases. All right. It does allow you to work with traditional relational databases, so we'll still work with tables and rows and columns. And again, this whole concept is known as Object Relational Mapping, or ORM. So when should you use this? When should you not use this? All right, well, you shouldn't use Object Relational Mapping when you're writing SQL queries manually, when you're executing these queries against a database, when you're reading results from a data reader, so the stuff that we've been doing previously. All right, why? Because this leads to a higher risk of bugs. But with EF Core, you can define C# classes that represent database tables. You can query the data using what's called line item queries, LINQ. You can insert, update, and delete data using objects, which most people, once they've worked with it a little bit, find it easier. And you can let EF Core generate and execute the SQL for you, which is probably the biggest advantage. All right, so the key building blocks of EF Core, the first ones are entities. And entities are just plain C# classes. All right, plain old C# objects. They're known as POCOs, POCOs. They represent database tables. So for instance, we're going to create one, and it will be very similar to what we did before, but we'll have an int for the ID with a get and a set, a string for the first name with a get and a set, a string for the last name for the get and the set, an int for the height with a get and a set, an int for the weight with a get and a set, a float or a double for the BMI with a get and a set, and another string for the BMI status with a get and a set. And we'll worry about the date created, and we'll put that in there also. All right. So each instance, each time we create one of these, it's going to represent a record or a row in the database table. Now, we're going to be working with what's called DB context, DB for database. It's the central class in EF Core. It manages database connections. It allows us to track changes that we make. It translates these LINQ queries that we will write to SQL, and it saves changes to the database for us. All right. It automatically tracks changes that you make to entities. It detects any changes that have been made. It generates the correct SQL update command for you. It executes it without you having to worry about writing any SQL. The benefits of this, all right, It allows for compile time checking. It has IntelliSense support. It's strongly typed. And it's database agnostic queries, which means, it can run it against any kind of database. So we'll talk about migrations in a little bit. And these migrations allow you to track database schema changes. They give you version control for your database, and they apply any schema updates that you might make automatically. All right, we'll get into all this stuff. But EF Core generates the SQL needed to update the schema for you, which is really a nice thing to have. All right. So why is EF Core a good choice? All right. Well, it increases productivity. It increases developer speed. It's strongly typed. It results in safer code. Okay, it allows for database abstraction. It works with many databases. For instance, SQL Server, which is what we've been working with, MySQL, which we worked with previously, SQLite, Postgres, SQL, and a lot of other ones. All right. This provides for maintainability and readability. The code is going to be easier for you to read than these big SQL strings that we had to come up with. It follows object-oriented principles. It keeps the data access logic consistent. There's built-in security benefits. It automatically parameterizes queries. If you don't know what that means, you'll learn it. It protects against that SQL injection that we talked about earlier. All right. It reduces common security risks. It provides excellent testing support. It generates efficient SQL. It supports compiled queries. It supports asynchronous operations. It allows for a finer, more granulated control when you need it. All right. And it's just, most people will tell you that once you work with it a while, it's much easier to use. It makes a lot more sense. It's especially useful if you're building CRUD-heavy applications. Now, what's CRUD? CRUD is an acronym for Create, Read, Update, Delete. We want to be able to do that with what we're working with. Maybe not so much in this application as much, but when we get to the payroll one, we'll want to do that. You want fast development with clean code. All right. Eventually, we'd like to move this to ASP.NET Core, and it works well with it. All right. And it's preferred typically by people who prefer C# over SQL. It may not always be ideal. If you have very complex hand-organized SQL, it might not be the best. If you're working on a read-only reporting system, it might not be the best. But really, it's an ORM, an object relational mapper that maps C# objects to database tables. It's a productivity booster. It's safe. It's maintainable. It's modern. All right. It typically results in less code with fewer bugs, which will typically give you faster development. All right. And it's hopefully going to be seamless for us when we eventually go to ASP.NET Core. So here is what they say in the C# corner. Entity Framework, or EF, is Microsoft's ORM tool for .NET. It allows you to perform database operations using C# objects instead of writing queries. All right. Again, ORM is object relational mapping. All right. Sorry about that. But when you look here, and this is taken from, again, csharpcorner.com article, Understanding Entity Framework in .NET. All right. So ORM is object relational mapping. It lets you interact with relational databases using object-oriented paradigm like C#. Again, pretty much what we've been doing, what we've been using, etc. All right. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up replacing something that looks like this, select star from products where price greater than 100, with something like this. We're making a variable, products, that's equal to db context products where, and we're doing the same kind of thing. As it says, this object relational mapper will convert the code into the SQL behind the scenes. Using an ORM has a lot of benefits. We've gone through some of these before. Entity Framework supports 3 main development approaches, so there's 3 ways you can do this. You can write the code first and let it create the database for you. You can write the database first and let it create the code for you. Or you can write the model first. All right, so let's look quickly at the 3 approaches. With code first, as it says, you start by writing the C# classes that represent the data model. The entity framework then creates the database schema based on these. Best suited, as it says, for new projects where no existing database is present. So again, I mentioned this before, we're going to do things more like this. And the entity framework will use classes to generate tables for you. In a database first approach, you begin with an existing database and then you reverse engineer it. Entity framework will reverse engineer it and generate the classes for you. Finally, with a model first approach, you design a model visually using what's called the EF, or Entity Framework Designer. You create a file that ends with a .edmx extension, and Entity Framework generates both the database and the code for you. All right. When to use it, again, or why to use it. Simplifies data access. It uses object relational mapping. It's ideal for CRUD applications. It supports migration, so if the database is going to change often, or possibly the schema is, all right, it's available as what's called a NuGet package, which we'll get to in just a bit. So as it says, Entity Framework is a powerful and flexible ORM that simplifies data access in .NET apps. Pretty good. All right. I also found this online. Now, I pay $5 a month and I get a thing called, medium.com. This is at Medium, but this one was just out there. You don't need a Medium account to be able to read this. So this was right here. I'll leave that up there for just a second. As it says here, EF is a powerful object relational mapping ORM framework for .NET that allows developers to work with databases using .NET objects. So rather than writing queries, you interact and manipulate objects. So they try to do a quick walkthrough here. Now this is a fairly short article. Okay, so first you have to install Entity Framework. So it says first you have to open up the NuGet package manager console and then run this command. And what the heck is that? Well, if I go over to Tools, you'll notice that over here we have the NuGet Package Manager. There's the console, all right, and you can run it in different ways. But if I come right here, that brings it up. Okay, kind of looks like almost like a DOS or disk operating system interface type of thing, command interface. So if I grab that and I go over to here, and I grab this command and copy it. All right, then I come back to here, paste it in, hit enter. It says could not install it. You're trying to install this package that targets 4.72, but the package does not contain an assembly reference for this. All right, so I'm going to have to go and look and see how to fix that, if that's fixable. Okay. It says alternatively you can use .NET CLI. I don't even know what that is. Sounds like a command line interface where you'd put this in. And then install the database provider for your database. So this would be for SQL Server. Okay. Step 2, you create a model class. This is what we're going to do. We'll get this to work eventually. But we're going to have a class. It might even be called BMI. I don't know. Step 3, you create a DB context class. As it says, it's used by EF Core to interact with your database. It's the bridge between the application and the database itself. Okay, we'll go over all this stuff later. Then you're able to start performing CRUD operations. So for instance, in our, and like I said, this might not be the greatest database example, but it's the one we're working with, the BMI. It'll allow us to create or insert new records, to read all the records. You've done that already. To update an existing record. Maybe someone's weight has changed, for example, or delete one or more records. One of the most powerful features, as it says here, of EF Core is migrations. They keep the database schema in sync, so if something changes, you can update it. To apply a migration, all right, you just update the database. Best practices says uses no tracking for read-only queries. If you only need to read and don't plan to update, you can do that. All right. Are we going to ever update? You never know. Avoid multiple save changes calls. Use dependency injection. This is all stuff that we'll have to talk about as we go on. All right. I'm going to keep this article up here so we can take a look at it again later. Now, this was very short, 17 minutes or so, but it was just meant to be a quick little introduction to Entity Framework. Now, we're going to be using EF Core. There's also EF6, and I believe that's not even what I want. Let's see. All right, for this is from Microsoft. I'm going to put in here C# Entity Framework Core versus Entity Framework. I want to make sure I'm telling you this correctly. Well, here's an overview, their overview of Entity Framework Core. But there was something that I saw before, and I want to keep this up as well. But I believe EF Core is the latest and greatest. You'll still see some stuff out there for EF6. Here's a comparison. EF6 is a wrapper, but with support for .NET Core. It's stable, but it's no longer actively developed, which means that you should be using EF Core rather than EF6. So that's what we'll be using. Okay? I'll be back in a little bit, and we're going to start putting this into action. Thanks.